travel.
I
Used to seeing you up here.
will intrude.
What's going on?
Okay, folks, I'd like to call the meeting of the Budget Committee to order and welcome everyone who is here with greetings for a fabulous new year ahead. Good work, good times, good friends. Had a friend of mine who used to say, every day is a holiday, every meal is a feast. Well, let's hope every day is a holiday and every meal is a feast. Welcome. There is an agenda, but it was not published, which is my mistake. I just want to review it very quickly so we have an order. Yes, published online. I'm not published in a hard copy. We're going to cover our consent agenda, which is approval of the minutes from our last meeting of December 17th. Bill Helm is here to talk with us about thoughts on bond financing options. The Energy Committee is here to talk further about the capital reserve request. Adam will spend a little time, Rickard will spend some time on capital improvement, the program and some of the content. We're going to ask for public input at that point, and then we're going to talk about financial forecasts. And lastly, the committee's remaining schedule and top targets that lead us to a public hearing scheduled for February 11th. So we've got some time-sensitive dates and work to do leading up to them. So with that, I'd like to get a motion to adopt the consent agenda, which contains the minutes from December 17th.
So moved.
Second? Are there any additions, deletions, edits that anyone has? There is hard copy of.
A very small thing. Under 5, revenue projections. It's just getting under my nerves. Can we change the word bumped up to increase, please? It just bumped up seemed a little casual.
That was the exact quote of the individual who made that.
You used?
Yes, but
okay.
We can change bumped up. Yeah, there's a typo in paragraph item 5, revenue projections, and I will make the adjustment in the typo, which is inconsequential, and also change that wording to increase. With those two recommended edits, can I ask for a vote to approve? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Bill Helm has already met with the Select Board, and at our last meeting, we were talking about our debt, both in terms of amounts, projections, implications on the budget, and discussion ensued that Bill had put forward a thought process on alternative way of thinking about some debt options, and our curiosity was raised, and as a result, asked Bill to come and share his thoughts with us, which I welcome you to do so now. Yeah, I thought it would be nicer sitting than standing.
It's on, right? How's that, okay?
That's good. Thank you, Bill.
I think I know all of you, except Cynthia. You may recall you were my neighbor for 2 weeks. Yeah, so anyway. So anyway, time has passed along here, and I'm here at your behest just to make sure everybody knows what I was talking about some six weeks ago now with the selectmen, and I think actually at your last meeting, Colin raised the question about why there hadn't been more discussion about what I said, and so you kindly asked me to come along, and just by way of reference, most of you, but maybe not all of you, know that 5 years ago, a group of former selectmen at the time sat down and put together a bit of a fiscal policy, or really more of a roadmap. It's not a cast in stone policy on how the town ought to be looking at its debt. And it's been my feeling all through the years that we don't spend enough time on that. We spend a lot of time on immediate taxation, on grants, fees, how many more tires do we need for this, or what's that going to cost, and so on, and very little time talking about the other tool that's in the toolbox for the town, which is the use of long-term debt. And particularly when I was talking to the selectmen in November, it was the issue of large non-recurring projects, large meaning over $250,000 and useful life of more than 5 years. And I was saying to the selectmen that night that right now, going into 2027, because of the report that was done on town buildings and other assets and so on, there's actually quite a backlog of those things going on. And wasn't this potentially an interesting time to think about bundling them into a package of debt? If you look at the debt schedule in the town report, you note that most of the long-term debt, other than the sewer bonds, in fact, is money that was spent over time for projects of one sort or another. And it was put together, and a couple of times Lynn has very nicely taken the higher coupon debt and combined it into a bigger bundle and refinanced it at lower interest rates. But really very little time. I mean, if you go back and think about your meetings so far this year, you've spent relatively little time talking about, gee, is there something we could do with debt here? And I would submit that that's still the case. But as you note, your budget hearing is just a month off now, and so it's probably too late to do anything this year. The burden on Lynn and Ashley and others to try to do something, that train's probably left the station for this year. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to spend time thinking about it. So let me just give you. I had an example back in November that I used with the select board, but some of the things that were possibilities at that point don't seem as likely now. But just for example, right now, if you look at your capital improvement program and your things that you have pretty well set up for doing this year, there's probably some order of between $300,000 and $500,000 of paving in the next 2 years. And paving is something that can be done on a schedule that's convenient for the Public Works Department and perhaps for outside contractors. But between the 2 years, between fiscal 27 and 28, there are $457,000 of paving projects on the books right now. And what you're doing to fund that is putting money into capital reserves with the left hand and taking it out on with the right hand. So it's not really a capital reserve, you're just taxing the residents right away for something that's hopefully going to last for more than 5 years, and hopefully closer to 30 years when you talk about the sidewalks and the apron at the fire station and so on. And similarly, in building maintenance, there's a $200,000 item for the roof on this building. There's another $100,000 of items for the town hall. And if you add those together over the next 2 years, because they all could be scheduled, that's another almost $300,000. So there, in my book, is $750,000 plus or minus of expenditures that, as the group that got together 5 years ago said, that's the sort of thing the town ought to be bonding, instead of having the taxpayers currently pay for that. Now, I think what got Colin's attention, if I remember after talking to him about it, was that not only is bonding maybe not a bad thing to do, but also you don't need to put all the money into the capital reserves and then take it back out. And so, in fact, if you take the examples that I just used and you look at the transfers that you're now scheduling to do for capital reserves in the next year, you could actually net out all of the proposed increase in next year's budget. The transfers to capital reserves could be reduced by some 22 cents. It would increase the cost slightly by about 3 cents for the bond issue to cover the $750,000. And guess what? Your increase right now, as of December 15th's comparative budget, was the same 19 cents. And my numbers are round, and I'm not a CPA, but it's close. And so that was what I was saying to the selectmen, and as I say, I think that's more by way of example now and to explain why the subject came up at the time and why Colin asked, what are you doing about it? And so I just would encourage you over the long term, you've got to get this budget wrapped up, you've got to get it put to bed, you've got a budget hearing to do, you've got a couple of other little details, but to go back to thinking about, spending some time thinking about debt. I mean, obviously, for the DPW building, for the police station, for water, I mean, those are great big projects that, nobody's going to say, well, let's tax people today for that. But when you have a group of fairly obvious infrastructure projects, not equipment, because equipment breaks, falls down, has to be maintained, but like paving and like the roof on this building and so on, isn't long-term debt an attractive alternative? Municipal bond rates are still pretty attractive. And some work probably needs to be done on the 5-year-old look at this. Perhaps a couple of people should get together, the town treasurer and so on, take a look again before we immediately have to say, well, we need to do some bonding now, and say, where do we stand? Because it's one of the tools in the toolkit, and trying to do everything simply by hitting the current tax bill with capital reserves and essentially running them in and running them out. It's not like you do with the fire equipment where you put it in now, next year, to spend 5, 7, 8 years out. This is literally money that you're going to put in and take right back out, so it's hardly a reserve, it's sort of a pass-through. And that's where I am, so I think that sort of brings you up to date, and in no way am I suggesting that's something the town ought to be doing right now, but I'm responding to a request to talk about what I brought up 6 weeks ago.
Thank you, Bill, very much. It piqued our interest, and timing probably isn't necessarily right at this point, but I think we're going to have some subsequent discussion tonight that's going to point to the very issue you're bringing up. It does relate to the Energy Committee's solar array ask, and there may be other things that come up. The other thing this committee has begun to look at, I know the select board is also, is how do you can you smooth the debt projection and actual expense, both in terms of timing and how much do you actually.
Well, we did that 5 years ago, but 5 years is an eternity in municipal finance. And it's really time to take another look at that. The world has changed tremendously, so I would urge Rich, Ashley to take that on in any case and say, we haven't taken a look at this in 5 years, and it's probably worth doing. But you've got a lot of other things on your plate right now.
Well, it's worth doing, I
I
think.
worry about the tax rate too.
Right.
And I think that's what triggered Colin, the other.
Right, and I think when we look at the capital improvement plan projection, it points to a significant capital requirement that is fairly immediate in the next 2 to 5 years. And the operating budget is also commensurately been increasing due to other operating costs that were unanticipated and/or have magnified based on new information and data. So,
Yeah, I think my point is that the capital reserves, which is the third piece of that, that's not the operating budget. It happens to appear the next line down and is included in the current year taxes because that's how you fund reserves. But I think there's always been room to do less capital reserves and more bonding.
more bonding, yeah, right. Thoughts, questions from the committee to Bill? Lindsay?
Yeah. Hi, Bill. Good to see you. I I have just an overall general question, and I don't know that Sam is in here, but if we're gonna dive into it, just from your thing here, and we talk about the sidewalk plan, for instance, and breaking that up. Why? Like, it's 1.5 miles? Can somebody explain that to me? And then only 122,000, when it's only going to be, by the time you reach, if it's a 7-year plan, you're gonna have to start all over again. It's gonna raise itself, and now we don't have traversable sidewalks again. And this is what I don't quite understand, that we don't get the overall entire project cost, and rather just presented, well, we're gonna do this 150 yards. And I feel it's like a disservice from a budget committee member to the taxpayers to ask, when will they all be just walkable sidewalks?
So what I would say is that having sat in Rich's seat for several years, is that if you're not thinking about long-term financing, you're sort of scheduling it out to deal with how much you think the system will bear in the short term.
So we're not genies.
There's a plan. Sam has a plan.
I understand the plan, but
We told him, take $500,000 and do it all in the next 18 months, that would be a different message to him.
Well, yeah, and again, I don't want to, Sam's not here, and that's not really fair, and I just want the explanation as to why it was decided to do so in the first place, so segmented.
Can I make a shot at this?
Sure.
In the scheduling of any capital program, the ability to achieve a goal, meaning put in the sidewalks, would stand at the corner of availability of time, availability of money, and availability of time, money, and like resources. Just like you literally have it in your schedule. So one might also suggest that you can keep the money down by scheduling it out over certain numbers of years and having your own people do that as opposed to contracting it out. And I'm not saying that one is better than another, but in the past they've chosen to stand on that intersection of it as opposed to bonding it, doing it at one point in time and getting it all out.
But John
Why
also-
have them if they're not at all compliant to anything, and hold some businesses to the tip-down standard and/or apron, and then you can't walk? Why are we, I think the taxpayers might go, oh, yeah, that project's not going to get cheaper in 7 years.
That's the point. John's absolutely right about the ability to do the project and the availability of the money. It's always going to cost more, John, so putting it off isn't going to save money.
It's like 1.5 miles. That's what my point is. Like,
Well, I think to the point, that's one item that might be thought about in terms of how we approach financing and the timing related of a particular project. So I think it's a point well taken, but should be considered in this. maybe in this-
Don't get hung up particularly just on the sidewalks. That's
Not at all.
today's project. The issue, I think, for the town and
Well,
the years that
your
I've
bond.
tried to serve the town is, what tools do we have to work with?
Right.
And this is a tool that doesn't get out of the toolbox as frequently as it might.
May I? And I completely agree, and that's why I would like to see what the cost of an entire project is sometimes, and then not go, well, it's too late this year. We budget 2 years in advance or 3, and now we got a 7-year project for sidewalks, and then we got to, make money for it in 2.5 years or 3 years, and like, when are we going to be able to use the sidewalks? Is my point. And that's where maybe a bond is. Yeah, but where the way it's sometimes presented to us is in, here's what we're going to do, and I'm like, wait, what's the whole cost of a project?
So I don't want to get hung up on sidewalks, and I think you're using it to make the point that it is a project that might be considered as we look at debt financing and its benefits going forward. Yeah, well, I think maintenance is potentially different because it's an operating expense, but it depends how you treat the expense. The proposal Bill is suggesting is that we're bundling together asset purchases that have a useful life and maintenance isn't an asset purchase. So that's the distinction there.
Yeah, and that's the point. I've sat on these, but I know all the words, guys. I understand the terminology. I don't need that explained. I'm asking from the perspective of a taxpayer and or, a citizen here who is going to ask some very simple, basic questions like that.
Okay, but I agree, and I'm tabling the conversation, Lindsay, because sidewalks is not the topic of tonight, and Sam is not present, and the committee has agreed we are not going to discuss an item related to a budget when the department head is not present to speak to it. So I want to table it for right now. Okay? Other
I've just
comments?
warmed up this chair because I know that I purposely didn't mention energy when I saw that Jamie was next, so. So I've just warmed it up for him.
Yeah, you did.
There might be
Thankfully.
a connection here.
Very good. Bill, thank you so much. Jamie, you and any members of your team are welcome to the table. We provided 3 seats rather than a podium, which is a little uncomfortable. So your choice of how you would like to engage with us. As a backdrop, we'll just let the committee as a whole, those who were here last, participated in some discussion with Jamie and Energy Committee members regarding the capital reserve expense request, which initially was lodged at $50,000. It was subsequently increased to $150,000. That raised a series of questions, which resulted in a set of questions that we compiled and returned to the Energy Committee, which they graciously and diligently took the time to answer. And the answers are in a document in front of all committee members. It was forwarded to me as early as possible by Jamie, and I forwarded it earlier today to all committee members, but you have a hard copy in front of you. I have read it in its entirety. I have some additional questions, but I want to thank you very much for the work and the thoroughness and the considerations that you have given, and welcome the dialogue we'll have this evening. So as a primer, Jamie, the floor is yours, if you would like it.
All right, thank you, Charlie. And would anyone like to come up and sit with me?
What an invitation.
So I'll be on the hot seat all by myself.
All right, you'll be okay. If any member has the urge to join you, they can do so at any time. Please feel free.
Okay, I'd just like to acknowledge.
Do so via microphone, would you, Jamie, please, so we can record it and hear you as well. Yeah.
There. So I'd just like to acknowledge Tim Parody, Robin Rainey Lobaz, John Ellis, and Meredith Smith, who are members of the subcommittee, along with myself, and the 5 of us prepared these answers and did a lot of the work yesterday and the rest early this morning. And actually, we received, I asked one of the solar vendors for a little help with the 3 questions we were unable to answer last night, and got some additional information, which is not in the document you received, but we can go over that this evening.
Great.
If you'd like.
Yep, very much so. I think for the committee as a whole, some members have not read it. I think it's worth making notation to some of the relevant answers. Not that none of them aren't all relevant, but some are redundant. But it might be helpful, Jamie, to speak to some of those. Certainly the first and foremost is projected cost and how that's arrived at, and you've answered that, and it might be helpful for the members of the committee as a whole to know that. Plus.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to. So first of all, the number we were batting around at the last budget committee meeting was $381,000 for the stump dump, and that number was not a hard number. It was based on the cost of the array we just installed on the roof of the fire station with a a little bit of an index for inflation. So it turns out that a lot has changed since December 31st, and everything's going to be more expensive in 2026, and even more expensive in the second half of 2026 than it is now, and with further cost increases happening at the beginning of 2027. So it seems like if we want to move forward with a solar project at all, let alone 2 or 3, we definitely want to proceed as rapidly as possible to at least lock in current pricing and not be subject to further price increases beyond what we're looking at now. So in 2025, we might have been able to do the project for $381,000 or close to it. Now we're looking at an estimate of $415,000 from one solar vendor. Another vendor gave us an estimate of $582,000. And the price quoted by a solar vendor is not 100% of the cost of doing the project start to finish, but it is the vast majority. So we estimate that for about $10,000 in additional costs, we can do all the necessary infrastructure improvements, utility line upgrades and electrical work on site. And those would be the 2 major components of the additional cost. We're going to have to move around some mulch and compost piles, which can be done by town employees using town equipment. And there may be some permitting work that needs to be done if there are state or federal permits that we need to obtain. My assumption is that any town permits would be pretty straightforward because we as the town can choose whether or not to follow our own permitting regulations.
Related to that, Jamie, is what I understood from what your response is, plus what you've just said, that these are estimates, they're not quotes. So ultimately, a quote would dictate price. And that could come in at a range between $415 and $582. But you've taken the lower and added 10,000 to get to the 425.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if we get 2 quotes and one is for 415 and the other is for 582, it would be highly irresponsible
Not
to go.
suggesting it isn't, I'm just saying that without a formal quote, you got 2 estimates that supported the dollar projections, total project cost. And I was just trying to clarify that. Do you know when you get a quote, how long the quote is good for?
It's typically good for 30 days.
Okay. And deposits are required, of which you've noted already, the committee's noted as a $150,000 number that goes with that, which is a contract, I assume, if there's a deposit associated with it at that point. Is that correct?
Right, so if we were to sign a contract for the stump dump in the next 6 months, using the vendor that came in with the lower cost estimate, then we would need to pay a 20% deposit at the time of signing the contract. So 20% of $415,000 would be $83,000.
Right.
And that's covered by the existing balance in the capital reserve. However, if we wanted to do a second project and lock in the price, for example, the Mountain Road landfill, where we could most likely do another project equal in size to the stump dump, then we'd be talking about another $83,000 deposit to lock in the current price for that project.
For 30 days.
Well, okay, so the 30-day period is just, that's how long the quote is good for. And if we sign the contract and pay the deposit within that 30-day period, then we have locked in that price. And we have up to 4 years to complete the project without any cost overruns.
Okay. You did not put any contingency dollars in to the projections. And what I'm curious about is, would it make sense to have some contingency dollars for unknowns, since both these are estimates, not official quotes? And thus, in doing so, of a project of this nature, unless the contractor's guaranteeing to absorb all the costs, no matter what they are, or acts of God, then typically in projects of the nature you're talking about, you do some kind of contingency.
Right, well, we have, there have not been any contingency provisions in any of the solar contracts that we, the Energy Committee, have seen. Now, since we're talking about, in this case, a project where there could be up to 4 years to complete it once the contract is signed, there may, when we actually get the contract in our hands, we may find that there are contingencies built into that contract.
Yeah.
But that has not been the case up to this point. So, for example, the fire station contract was a fixed price contract with no contingencies, and the price was the price, and that's what we paid, and we didn't have to pay a penny more. So we're hoping that we'll be able to proceed on that basis with future arrays as well. I mean, it might be useful to build in contingency for the infrastructure improvements.
If you make a deposit on a project, and for factors unknown today, the town decided we're not going to do that, what is the town obligated to regarding the deposit? Does it get it back 100%, or is it a portion of it that's forfeited by nature of changing our minds?
Okay, so that's one of the questions that we weren't able to answer last night or this morning, but we did get an answer to that this afternoon. And thankfully, the answer is the same as what we were given for the fire station. So if we had signed the contract for the fire station and then decided to pull out, basically the deposit is used to pay project-related expenses that happen before construction starts. And so if the solar vendor incurred actual costs between the time we signed the contract and the time we canceled and pulled out, then we would not get back the actual costs that they had incurred, but we would get every penny of the deposit that had not been spent.
Okay, makes sense. In the calculations, and I'm jumping ahead just to then sort of be a perimeter to the rest of the committee for questions, we've calculated renewable energy credits as part of the income. And that's a moving number based on a lot of factors, but primarily market factors. At the time the credits are available.
Correct.
Is that correct? And in my conversations with commercial lenders, which I referenced in my email, I had a member, John Ziegler, who did several solar loans as a commercial banker over the course of his career. One of the things they did, and I'm just saying this is how, as a bank, they looked at it, they did not include the renewable energy credits in the calculation of return on investment. And they didn't look at return on investment, actually. They looked at net income. And from a bank standpoint, his bank, Mascoma Bank, they looked at it, if we had a project, if they had a project that was break even or had positive net, great. They didn't really care about the ROI component. So the thought is, I was sort of asking your perspective on renewable energy credits, the liability of the credit in terms of dollars and timing. Is it realistic or is it aspirational? Because the market can fluctuate on you either way, I suppose, and it's not a factor you control.
Well, every project I'm familiar with has relied on renewable energy credits or certificates for its financial viability. And a perfect example of that is the Poverty Plains project that's under construction right off I-89 in Warner. That project would not be happening were it not for the renewable energy credits that are going to be generated by that project.
Okay. Now you have a friend.
Hey, Peter, welcome.
Peter, did you want to comment?
Yeah, Peter Vedova. Just to add to that, you know, conservatively, when the vendors, the solar array builders, factor the credits, what they do is they look at a historical average of the payouts of these credits, and they go very conservative. They cut back from that typical average. So they're not factoring in, you know, an aggressive amount, but they do factor in a conservative historical average of what they think, or what's been paid out in the past. Yeah, the market fluctuates. There's no guarantee that, you know, we're going to get a good rate on the REC when it is sold, or when enough energy is produced to then qualify for the credit. However, conservatively, I think those numbers have worked in the estimates that the solar vendors have given. I think it's valid in terms of the conservative nature that they've taken.
Okay. My last question is, and I'll yield to the other committee members. If I just follow my math for a second, if the project cost is estimated at $425,000, and I take my concept of contingency into play and just add 20,000 to it, my total is 445,000 for the stump array. The current capital reserve balance available for that is $111,130. That leaves us a delta of $339,000. You're asking for 150. If the 150 is approved, you still have a delta of $184,000. So it seems like and it's presumptive on a zero cost of capital, meaning it's fully financed through capital reserves. So if the project is going to take place in fiscal 2027, it seems to me you would need all that money available for that project at that time versus just a piecemeal amount. And that's where I'm just hung up on the financing.
Okay, well, let me attempt to address that. So what we would like to make sure of is that if we're able to get a quote and a contract that we can sign in the next 6 months, we would like to do not one but 3 arrays. And all we're going to need in the next 6 months is 20% of the cost. And one of the things that we talked about at the last budget meeting, or maybe it was the selectmen's meeting, Lynn Lewis, who's unfortunately not here, mentioned that it might be possible to bond the remaining 80% of the cost. And she was of the opinion, she hadn't run any numbers, of course, she was of the opinion that the revenue from these projects would more than pay the interest cost on the bond. So if we finance 20% through the capital reserve and the remaining 80% through a sustainability bond, then we would have a decent return on investment, and it would cost the taxpayers a lot less in that the bulk of the expense would be financed rather than paid up front. So that's it's an interesting, hybrid financing method to take a look at. And just having enough funds in the capital reserve to be able to put down the 20% deposits would give us a lot of flexibility in how to finance the remainder of the cost.
Okay. Other committee members, questions, thoughts? Karen?
I'd like to, Jamie, if I could, pick up on a question when we last met, and I think you answered it at the subsequent evening's Board of Selectmen meeting, and that is the alternative, I'm going to bring this up again, of going to community power to meet the objective set in the 2018 town meeting of having the town on renewable energy sources. So an alternative that wouldn't require any capital investment is for the town to take advantage of the community power rates where that is the source, and thereby we're accessing that solar or those renewable power coming on the grid from already existing projects installed or used by community power. And I think you had a number that you shared with the Board of Selectmen at what that cost would be. So I think it would be informative to the committee to hear that.
Right. Thanks, Karen. So, yes, I did some calculations to figure out what it would cost the town to purchase so-called renewable electricity to make up the, basically to get us from our existing 45% renewable up to 100% renewable. And that cost this month would be about $16,000 on an annual basis based on the rates in effect this month. But it's going to jump way up to $19,000 or $20,000 annually based on the rates that take effect next month. So, there's a bunch of uncertainty built in that the premium for renewable electricity could go even higher in the rate periods to come. So it's true that no upfront capital investment is required for either the taxpayers or for a bond, but you're subject to electric rates that may go through the roof in the future, versus with no certainty about what that premium is going to be a few years from now, versus if we go with the approach of building municipal solar, it seems like we can get a positive return right from day one, and that return will be pretty much locked in because it looks like municipal solar is a financial win right now with the current electric rates, and those electric rates are only going to go higher. And every time Eversource raises its rates, that means the town is going to make more money on our solar arrays. So that's looking to the future, we get increasing revenue as opposed to looking to the future and getting increasing costs.
I just have a really simple question. Who sets the rates then on the solar? Is it the community power?
So are you talking about the rates for renewable electricity?
Yeah,
Or the rates that the town receives for selling surplus solar power?
Both, yeah.
Oh, okay. So each utility, Eversource and the others, gets to submit proposed rates to the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission, and the PUC holds a hearing and either approves or denies the rates. And that happens every 6 months. So in December, Eversource announced the rates that it would be charging from February 1st through July 31st, and those rates were approved by the PUC. So beginning at the beginning of next month, Eversource's rates will go up, only a tiny bit, but they will go up. And that's been the trend for quite some time. Now, Community Power is not a utility, so the Board of Directors sets its rates, and Community Power has the goal of matching the timetable for utility rate settings. So Community Power, the Board of Directors approved those rates in December, and those will take effect February 1st. So it's the same process, it just doesn't require PUC approval.
Other questions? Please, Lou, here.
And if I could just add one thing, which is that the same rate that Eversource charges you for the electricity you use forms the basis for the rate that Eversource will pay the town when we sell them our surplus electricity from solar.
So it's still Eversource's or it's the board? That's what I want to make sure, like, there's longevity into, I think the payoff would be like 16 years for this initial investment at that rate of like $25K, which is awesome. I mean, that's not, I just want to learn more about who the deciding factors are of those rates then for this other power network. And that, okay.
And along the same line, when we're talking about longevity, are these energy credits and the ones that solar energy credit, renewable energy credits that ended on December 31st, the same thing? I understand that, the budget, okay, they're completely different. The end of these energy credits will not affect what we're looking at.
So you mean just a week and a half ago?
Yeah.
Or less than a week ago?
So the budget bill that was signed in July
Right.
last year.
So that was a tax credit, a federal tax credit for residential solar arrays. So it's only the residential tax credit that ended on December 31st. Commercial and municipal tax credits and rebates continue for up to 4 more years. Depending on if you satisfy the new requirements, which are stricter than they were, but even so, relatively easy for the town to satisfy those requirements if we act between now and July 4th.
So to summarize, correct me if I am misstating, what this committee is being asked is for a $150,000 capital reserve allocation for fiscal year 2027. In the capital reserve plan, there are subsequent year $50,000 amounts. What I've heard is that you are asking for the $150,000 to be able to make deposits on 3 projects, obligating the remainder to bond financing.
Well, that's one way to move forward. It's not the only way, but it may turn out to be the best way.
Okay.
So I'd love to hear from Lynn what she thinks in terms of the bond financing approach. But
I don't think there's any debate that bond financing is an approach to consider, absolutely, versus, I mean, Bill made comments earlier about bond financing and its advantages over capital reserve financing. So the magnitude of what I think I'm hearing is you're talking about bond financing of somewhere in $800,000 number, and you have to be obligating that bond that money at some point in time. So that ties into a warrant article supporting a bond request.
Yes.
And where, maybe you can enlighten us on that.
Yes, it does require a warrant article. It also requires a public hearing, and the window for that public hearing for the bonds is now. So we have to, if there is interest in this, we need to work real fast because we need to get all of our ducks in a row. We have to get actual quotes. We have to take everything to bond counsel, and then go to the bond bank, and then have a public hearing in the next 3 weeks.
Can you buy community power now to meet or work closer toward our goal of renewable energy 2030? And do that for a year or 2 years, and then take a track of pursuing solar array purchase, own, operate?
Well,
Or are you obligated long-term on the community power contracts?
There's no long-term obligation,
Right.
so we could definitely use a hybrid mix of different approaches to get to 100% renewable. The thing to keep in mind is that if we want to take advantage of, number one, the existing prices, which are bound to go up, and number two, the federal rebate that is the 30% federal rebate that is guaranteed to go away if we don't act, then we need to at least sign a contract and put down the 20% deposit in the next 6 months. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we would be able to defer putting a bond on the town meeting warrant until March of next year, because once we sign the contract and put down the 20% deposit, we have 4 years, up to 4 years to complete the project and still be entitled to the 30% federal rebate. So we wouldn't need a penny more than the 20% deposit until fiscal 2028 or perhaps even fiscal 2029 or 2030.
Wouldn't the voters have to approve the the concept of the $800,000 obligation prior to signing the contract? So here's my question. I get that you got the 20% sitting in the bank and that we can pay that. I totally understand if this were private industry, I get that what you've got, what you're talking about works. But this isn't private industry, it's a government. And so are the selectmen able to, in their power, execute a contract for $800,000 that would, in essence, be contingent upon bond approval in 6 or 7 months' time later, where we would potentially lose money out of the deposit that we paid to the company? By the way, this has nothing to do with me being for or against the project. It simply is a technical question of, I don't think that you can, what I'm hearing, I don't think we can actually do.
I have a question to piggyback.
Let's get that answered first. Do you have any sense, Ashley, on that and what?
I don't. I think that it is a real risk, though, because I think John is correct in his thinking in that no matter what, a bond would have to go to our voters at town meeting. Now, whether that we try to cram it in for this year or whether we try to do it next year, there needs to be some education on the full cost, if that is what we are bonding of that full $800. That would be the picture that is painted and the information shared on the full cost of the project.
Ashley, or maybe Bill Helm might know, there's a certain percentage of debt to bond ratio that is normally recommended for municipalities or, where, does anybody know where we are necessarily on that percentage?
Bill?
Am I correct in that, Bill?
more or less, but it's absolutely irrelevant for New London because our assessed values are so high that the
Oh.
3% that the DER has.
But does it tie up the ability to then ask for a bond on something else?
Well,
That money is
that's
then
right.
voted on it?
You're right back, Lindsay, to what I said we worked on 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Trying to have sort of at least an idea of what we should be doing.
Okay.
And 5 years ago, we had certain ideas about what needed to be done. Now, I mentioned them before. I think there's
Yeah.
a garage. I think there's a police station. I think there's some water.
I just caught up
here's
with
some energy. Somebody needs to sit down and look at the great big picture, because if you're standing at town meeting, somebody's going to say, well, that's 800,000. What about the 3 million here and the 5 million there? And
I
not
thought-
to mention the minor little one I was talking about.
I thought we also had some sort of.
But there's no rule. There's no rule.
There's a policy.
There's not even a policy. There's guidelines. It's called a policy, but it's
a guideline.
totally within the ability of the taxpayers of New London to decide how much burden they want to take on in debt. The state's limit would cause us to have hundreds of millions of dollars of debt.
Oh, yeah.
Because of this, it's a percentage of assessed value of the town.
Understood. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Karen,
Jamie, in the presentation that was made a few weeks back, there was, and we just learned that the 381,000, as you were tightening up the number, looked like it was more like 415, and then you had that other estimate. The numbers under there on the proposal for Public Works in the Mountain Road landfill, so following that example on the stump dump, those numbers there are not, those are subject to revision as well, correct?
Well, to the same degree that the stump dump number is subject to revision. But the cost estimate that I received yesterday from the vendor who's the lowest cost so far, it read exactly like a quote, except it wasn't labeled a quote. So there were detailed specifications of how many panels, the make and model, and wattage of the panels, and how many inverters, and the wattage of the inverters, and it was very detailed information, comparable in detail to what we've seen in firm price quotes that we've received in the past. So I'm much more confident about the $415,000 number than I would be of a typical estimate, and certainly way more confident than I was of the earlier estimate, which was just based on the last project we did.
So I guess what I was trying to get at is the presentation where there was a total proposal in it before the investment tax credit, it totaled $918,000, and that was a stump dump, Public Works, and Mountain Road. So what I'm hearing is that 918 is actually likely going to go, well, it's going to go up based on the 381 to 425, but it could also go up as well if needed to update on Public Works and Mountain Road landfill, just to get the scope of the total 3 projects that were put before us at the previous meeting.
Right, so just to talk briefly about the other 2 projects, the Mountain Road landfill and the Public Works. The Mountain Road landfill we see as being basically a carbon copy of the stump dump. And the vendor who gave me an estimate for the stump dump said that we could assume that the cost of solar at the Mountain Road landfill would be virtually identical, because it would be the same size project with the very similar components in the specification. Now, in terms of Public Works, he was not able to give me any certainty at all, because we don't know what that site is going to look like once the consultant comes back with recommendations and we decide how to move forward with construction. So it seems like we might, at Public Works, only be able to put solar on the roof of the new building, not on the ground, in which case we wouldn't be able to achieve the amount of solar that we were hoping to get out of that site, and we might need to take Karen's suggestion and make up the deficit by buying from community power. But if we, if we can't get to 100% due to the Public Works site not being fully utilizable, the deficit that we'd have to make up by buying from community power would be much, much smaller than it would be if we took that action today. So we might get ourselves to, let's say, 90% renewable rather than 100%, and then make up the remaining 10% by buying from community power. And I think that's an outcome that everybody would be happy with, because then the outlay to community power would be maybe $5,000 a year, if that, rather than the $16,000 to $19,000 that we estimate currently.
Okay, I think,
One question.
please.
It sounds like the urgency is this June deadline for the federal grants,
July 4th, yeah.
July 4th. So if you were to put the deposit down, holding that spot, is there a requirement that you execute on the contract in a certain period of time? And if you decided to hold off till the budget, till the town meeting could vote on it, and you had chosen to hold off from doing any activity, the money could be refunded if it didn't pass, correct?
Pretty much, yes. So you would, the town would need to sign a contract and put down the deposit at the same time, and that would happen prior to July 4th. But the deposit, as I mentioned earlier, is almost 100% refundable. It's only non-refundable to the extent that the solar company is incurring actual costs.
And what would be the basis of those costs? It would be determined by what you're asking them to do, or can you wait for a period of time?
Well, take the fire station, for example. The solar company had to file a permit application with Eversource. It's called an interconnection application. And I think the filing fee is around $100. And so that fee came out of the deposit we paid them for the fire station. And they may have charged a little bit of time for preparing the application, I'm not sure. That would have come out of the deposit also. But these, as far as I can tell, are pretty small costs that will be incurred by the solar company on our behalf. So one question that I might want to put to them myself and all of you as well is, why a 20% deposit? Why not, say, 5%? So I think the reason for the large deposit is they don't want people to sign frivolous contracts and then try to back out.
Skin in the game.
Yeah.
Understood.
And
Mortgage contract. If you're purchasing a house, you're gonna get better if you're putting down 20%, because you got skin in the game.
Okay, we're going to close conversation after your question.
Okay. Jamie, just recognizing the size of the deposit, is there any chance that the solar company would make any investment in, like, purchasing the solar panels? Because we're talking in this particular case of kind of long-term. So that there's a significant, could be significant delay between the time the contract is signed and the actual implementation. So I'm just thinking out loud here, would it then behoove the solar company to purchase some solar panels to protect themselves, because now they have a contract that they've committed to it? So there's my question there. Thank you.
right. So I think they are absolutely thinking along those lines. And if they're not actually purchasing the components, they are signing contracts with their suppliers to purchase the components because they need to not only lock in pricing, but they also need to lock in exemptions from the increasingly stringent federal regulations that are going to kick in over the coming years. And
Rich, you
so,
want to make a comment?
yeah, so there's all of a sudden an awful lot more advanced planning that needs to be done by these solar companies than ever before to make sure that they are able to comply with the more strict federal regulations. Because if they don't comply with those regulations, then we lose our federal rebate. And they don't want to leave us holding the bag. So they're going to bend over backwards to make sure that our project will be guaranteed to qualify for the federal rebate. And that does involve, like I said, more advanced planning on their part. And they're doing all that on our behalf.
Rich?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, from my standpoint, first of all, thank you and the rest of the folks in the Energy Committee for all the work on this. I can tell you, when I look at our overall budget, this is the one area of our budget that, as important as all of our other expenditures are to provide for maintaining the roads and keeping them clear of snow and providing police and fire, et cetera, this is the one area of our budget that in due course can become a money-making machine. And that is something that always jumps out at me. And I appreciate the fact that we're looking very carefully at, do the numbers make sense? I just want to say, from my standpoint, I think the numbers do make sense. And it is something that we absolutely should be thinking very seriously about moving very quickly on, because I can tell you in my 18 years on the MBC for the school district, I have seen every time we have delayed a project, every time we have put it off, it has inevitably, we eventually had to do it anyway. We lost the benefit of that project for some years, and it always cost us more. It always cost us more. And time and again, we have tried to learn that lesson, and not always successfully. So, for what it's worth, one person's opinion, but I think it's a very important project. In the scheme of our budget, it is actually not a huge amount, actually. And as I said, it is that one area of the budget that can, in due course, become a money-making machine for the town, which I find very appealing.
Therefore, do you foresee pursuit of a warrant article for this town meeting? And if so, I agree with what you've said. I'm stuck with timing in relationship to the brevity of what would be required to make that possible.
What I think would be required is to make sure that these folks would have the 20% that is necessary. That's my understanding. To make sure that 20% would be available to them so that they could capture those potential rebates, et cetera. And, to your point, John, it was a good point you mentioned. But I can tell you, I'm not concerned. We will figure out how to pay for it. That's not a huge concern of mine.
It wasn't a matter of paying for it. It was asking about the legality of the Energy Committee and the budget and the selectmen's entering into a long-range contract, which would require a bond issue without having taken that to the voters prior to signing that contract. It's just a legal question more than anything.
I think the way
Go ahead, Chris, please.
the one thing, it doesn't have to be a bond issue, right? Maybe it is a legal issue if it's a bond issue, but if that's the case, if the risk, putting that money toward the 20% and having that risk, I guess at some point you could put it as part of the operating budget.
And that's what I mean, John, when I say I'm not concerned about, and the remarkable things that people can come up with contracts about are just mind-boggling, you know? I mean, just unbelievable. So I'm not worried about that aspect of it. That we can figure out.
It is your profession, not mine, so.
I have one last question. I know it's somewhere in there, and I can't find it right now, but what was the power generation output of all of these solar panels?
Well, normally, power generation, well, it can be measured in kilowatts.
Okay, kilowatts hour.
Or in kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
So in kilowatts, we're talking about trying to get 127, and there are different kinds of kilowatts as well, which makes things even more complicated. But if we talk just about the stump dump, we're proposing 127 DC kilowatts of solar panels.
Okay.
And that will be throttled down to 100 kilowatts AC, because in doing so, we get the best credits from Eversource. So projects that are more than 100, they get paid at a lower rate. They get credited at a lower rate. So we'll put in 127 kilowatts, throttle it down to 100, and the production over the course of a year is estimated at 165,000 kilowatt hours per year, which at a credit of 12 cents per kilowatt hour translates to $19,800 in the bank in 1 year.
If you would end up, and I'm only referring that because of a thing that just happened last week, which was a ice storm. If we, in the case that we end up with the main transmission lines being cut, could that solar array power some of the homes in the area? Or does that electricity just?
Grid's down, it's down.
Yeah.
The power you have to have a backup.
So you don't, okay, so it's not a possibility of making a closed system in town?
Well, not the way the grid is currently structured. But we do have the power as individual homeowners to island our homes from the grid. And if we have either a generator or a storage battery, we can power our homes during an outage. And that can be scaled up to create so-called microgrids, where at some time in the future, we could create our own microgrid for the town of New London and power at least a portion of the town with municipal solar, even when there were widespread grid outages. But it would probably require installing storage batteries. And this concept is already in use in many parts of the world. Australia is a prime example, but islands off the coast like Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, they are either looking at this approach or already implementing it. Places that are on the fringes of the grid where there's barely enough transmission to get them the power they need, they're looking more and more to setting up microgrids in the future. So certainly an approach worth looking at. I don't think it would be economically feasible right now, but it may become feasible within just a few years.
Jamie, I think hopefully you are all hearing that there's great support for pursuing this, and we're scratching our heads still a little bit on the numbers, but the concept and the idea that it's going to cost us more the longer we delay it, it's a revenue source, all makes sense. I want to come back just quickly and close out the conversation on this. The ask from the Energy Committee is $150,000 for the capital reserve. If that ask was approved, that would provide a sufficient balance to pay the 20% deposit, which potentially is negotiable, to lock in these projects, and to Rich Anderson's comment, we can figure out how to pay for this. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So that's what this committee will work with as the request. And when we get to the point of determining our budget, recommended budget, that will be one item that will be discussed, and that will happen on the meeting of the 21st of January. So if the number calculation that you have done is possibly different, meaning the 20% calculation, specifically if it would be higher, we would like to know that sooner than later. Otherwise, we'll work with those numbers and those estimates if you're comfortable with them.
That sounds great.
Okay.
So just today, I contacted the town's electrical contractor to try and get a hard number from them on the cost of their portion of the infrastructure improvements, and I plan to call Eversource tomorrow to work on getting a hard number from them as well. And that'll pin down more closely that kind of vague $10,000 figure.
And back to Cynthia's question, and I think the conclusion that I've drawn from the dialogue that took place is, we make a 20% deposit, we got 170,000 down. If for some reason the town decides, whoa, we're not going to do it, or we're going to delay it beyond the window of 4 years, then some portion, a larger portion of that deposit is refundable to the town, but that would be contractually dictated. Fair?
That's definitely fair to say. And I think more than likely only a tiny fraction of the deposit would have actually been spent by the solar company. So, I mean, we might get back as much as 99%, but I certainly hope that having made the deposit, we will follow through with the construction and operation of a solar array.
As would I.
I'm
just looking at the what if.
And I just like to conclude by saying that the solar panels are so amazing that their performance only degrades by 0.5% per year. So in theory, after 100 years, they'll be still producing at 50% of their original power output. And what else in this world can you say something like that about?
Agreed. Did you want to comment?
No, I was just saying, I don't mean to be devil's advocate, but I would imagine that the stump dump is not going to take 4 years to build. So to your question, that deposit would have probably already been used up in the cost of putting the stump dump array together or the other. So if something was pushed off, I would imagine that most of that deposit's already been spent on the stump dump project and materials and time. So I would imagine after 4 years, you're not going to get anything back if the whole project's not finished.
Well, yeah, certainly not after 4 years.
Yeah, that was just.
But
the
after 4 weeks or 4 months,
agreed.
it would be a totally different story.
Absolutely, yeah. I was just clarifying Charlie's question.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, members of the committee, for all your work and the information.
All right, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
It's-
All right, I'd like to move to our next topic, which is capital improvement program. Ask Adam Ricker to join us at the podium. And before we have this conversation, I want to make note of an error that I've made, and I am responsible for, and that is the distinction between the capital improvement program and capital reserve documents. So as a participant in the capital improvement program committee, that committee met, and Adam will talk about this in greater detail, and established a capital improvement program plan that looked out 10 years. That is a planning document, not a funding document. And some of the documents that are in our notebook have sort of confused us, and certainly confused me. That has subsequently been clarified. So one of the notations and Adam will help make the distinctions here in this conversation. And I'll leave that to you, Adam, but I think the purpose of having this discussion right now, typically the capital improvement plan would have been covered at the start of the budget conversation process, because it's a forecast of potential future capital requirements for a 10-year period. That would then inform discussions about funding, timing, and related issues. So, particularly debt. So that's the interrelationship. Do you want to try to segue off of that?
Sure, absolutely.
Apology on my
Yeah,
part.
no worries.
To talk through us.
So I'll sort of explain to everyone what the CIP is, how the process moves along, and how it's adopted by the planning board, and then what is the manner in which you're supposed to use it to get the most benefit out of it as you go through your budget preparations and your capital reserves. So the CIP is required to exist by state law as a function of the planning board, which is a little funny that the planning board, a land use board, is put in charge of a document that has a lot of financial background to it, but you really have to kind of forget that there's the financial portion of it, because it's really a planning tool. And so it's really more about what are the projects in the 10-year focus and sort of planning them in the overall operations of the town. And then some communities do actually specify the funding sources that have potential for each project when they do their CIPs. It's not a requirement. Our board in the past has not done that because they feel like that's really the expertise that the selectmen and the budget committee have, and it's really not within their wheelhouse to really be saying this should be bonded or this should be a capital reserve or a grant or whatever it may be, because that's really outside of their general knowledge base. If a town decides to go away from the planning board being the group that does actually prepare the CIP, they have to go through a town meeting process to identify an independent CIP committee, which we have never done. But we've kind of taken a hybrid approach in an informal manner by going a sort of subcommittee work group of the planning board over the last 7 or 8 years. I think, Colin, you were on the first year that we did that back in like 2018, right? So we have invited members of the budget committee, the select board, and various other public members at times to work with the planning board in a subcommittee fashion to meet with all of the department heads and review their capital expenses over the next decade. And then when it actually comes to the adoption of the plan, the members who are not actually sitting on the planning board, they don't get to vote on the adoption of the plan. They participate right up until the end, but the public hearing at the planning board is for the planning board members to adopt it. And that's where some confusion can start. So the planning board adopts it, typically early October, and the plan can't be changed after that until next year when we start the process over again. At that point, none of the budget process has really started. We haven't started with the selectmen. You guys haven't even seen your budget binders in any draft form yet, and things often change after that, but we can't change what's in the plan. And sometimes the changes are completely outside of the budget process. There's things in here like the skid steer under the Public Works equipment, which we were actually able to accomplish back in the end of November, I think it was, simply because we had a savings in the backhoe acquisition this fiscal year, and so we were able to actually step ahead, which we didn't anticipate. So what we had adopted 3 weeks prior was already outdated, and it'll be in there until next summer when we start that process again and we remove it, or if it's something that's on a 10-year replacement schedule, we would then add it to the next year on the far end. And so I know it can be frustrating, especially I think for community members who try to sort of use this document to plan long-term, that this is a static document after it's adopted, that it doesn't stay updated in the next 6 months until we start again in about June, when I sit down with department heads and we start to go through the plan and see what have we done, what it needs to be added, what needs to be modified. Every year, we go through every project, and unfortunately for Sam, 9/10 of this falls under his department between Public Works and Sewer and Transfer. And so we spend a considerable amount of time in June and July going through project by project, looking at things like sidewalks every year to adjust the actual schedule of the sidewalk plan. So just because the phased project is in here with particular segments each year in the FY27 version, doesn't mean that next year's version may not actually hopscotch to a area that needs attention sooner. And that's actually happening this year. We will be headed down to the sort of the opposite end of what was completed this year, and do from Holman's Corner down in front of John's house to the school. And so every year that is reassessed. And as far as, as Charlie was saying earlier, when I'll use sidewalks as an example since it's came up, and we won't dive too deeply so that Sam could opine if he needed to, but when we look at those and when we go through this iterative process each year, the reason it stayed as a phased operation and it started out as a 6-year plan, we've now completed 1 year, so you'll see 5 in here, is because all of this, the previous CIP committees, the budget committees, the selectmen have all supported the phased approach when we have to take into account all of the other demands on especially Public Works with the facilities and the vehicles and the equipment. And so we're sort of kind of stuck trying to even that out.
Therein kind of lays some of my point, which is why is it a CIP and not just an operational cost to have the sidewalks maintained at a certain level?
Yep.
Instead of going, oh no.
Yeah, so
that's where I just want to know more of an operational cost for some of these things, because they're not in perpetuity when you fix them once. We're going to have to keep doing it. And so that's where I want to get away from not always, to that point of the CIP coming. No, we need to make sure we have the appropriate operating budget with maintenance built in for these things.
Right, and so with each thing that's in the CIP, there's likely an operational cost that's already housed within the department's budget. So whether that's the grader that each year might need $15,000 worth of maintenance that is in the vehicle maintenance fund, the actual capital expenditure when it comes to replacement falls into the CIP.
Well, clearly, we need to put more focus on maintenance.
Right, but even sidewalks or roads.
Not
or
even sidewalk, just
any piece of equipment that is perfectly maintained each year will eventually need full depth reclamation or full depth replacement. That's the objective of this plan. And so sidewalks are a good example to continue on, where right now we see 6 years in this plan because that's the Main Street plan. I would say in the next 2 fiscal years, that's going to grow. Sam and I are already talking about where does the sidewalk plan go once Main Street is done. We have the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee actively working on where are the areas that may need new sidewalks, where are Parkside, Elkins, Pleasant, where are these other areas that are going to need, even though they've now had maintenance, because maintenance is being bolstered. We can't change the maintenance that didn't happen, in previous decades. But the current budgets that Public Works are proposing are maintaining the sidewalks that are here. I think the perspective has changed, pretty dramatically in the last few years. Unfortunately, the sections that are in here, they're simply too far gone.
I understand. I just want to make that point of perspective from me then, and that's where we have a reactionary to catastrophic events that then derail all of these capital improvement plannings and budgets, because all of a sudden our highway department building is condemned and something else gets pushed down when we need a better, clearer way of just understanding our overall operating costs and what maintaining at basic civic expectation levels should be. And I think that's where we need to really, focus a little bit more and really have a little bit more like, what do we do? What's going on? Rather than just go, okay. That's kind of where I'm at. So.
And I think this document reflects that objective, because 10 years ago, the CIP was very minimal. It was 4 bullet points with a 2-page narrative document. And we have in increments since, I can only speak since 2017 when I arrived, but we have expanded it each year. And to the point where last year when we acquired the new budgeting software, now it's all being done under the umbrella of the budgeting software. Now it has its limitations and we're still learning those. For example, a phased project like sidewalks or the Jobs Creek sewer valve replacements, the way that it reports out, you actually can't see the details that we have in narrative behind that the same way that you can in line items in the budget reports, which is just a difficult. If you all had the software in front of you with your laptops, you could see that, but the printed reports just don't spit it out in the right manner. But we're figuring out how to phase them. Sidewalks and sewer infrastructure used to be individual projects. We've now moved them in, as you see here, to these phased projects.
You know, I'm not holding you or
No, I know, and I
at
think-
all accountable. I'm saying it on public record just to kind of put it out there.
Absolutely, and I think it's good, though, to help people understand that the objective that you're hitting on is something we are also working towards, and this is a reflection of, I think, growth in that process. If we look at the CIPs from 6 years ago to this document, so hopefully it'll continue to get a little bit better every year. It does get confusing when you get to the capital reserves and the CIP, because some things in here you will choose to fund through capital reserves, some things you will choose to attack via a bond or perhaps a grant or simple taxation. And so when you get into your capital reserves conversations, it's really Lynn and the department heads that have sat down to, behind the scenes, sort of make those assumptions as far as which fund will be the one that's funding it.
Charlie, if I can just make one more, and I think that's what I'm getting at, as the budget committee, we do have an ownership, and we need to see the total operational cost of these things and see then where your line items are falling short, rather than, you telling us, oh, well, don't worry about that. We're going to pull it from the CIP or this capital reserve, and we're like, well, we're supposed to be tracking that too. What is the cost, and what is the operational expenditure or projection for its for replacement? That's in my mind what a CIP committee or capital reserves is for. It's for knowing that we're going to need to do it again in perpetuity, but then also aligning a budget so that we are funding and paying for what it costs now. And that's just where I wanted to clarify. I just want to see a budget from a department that actually shows me exactly what things cost and what it should be operationally.
I think it's partially the distinction between what's a capital expense, what's an operating expense.
Yeah, that's it.
And I think the picture that the capital improvement program plan shows is a projection of capital expense over a 10-year period. And if you look at that just on the total page, you see in 2028, we've got 8 million, 2029, 11 million, 2030, 1.6 million, then it's 2.6 million, it's 3 million, and it doesn't include the water precinct. If we go, say we're going to solve the water problem, there's $3 million that needs to get built into this capital plan, so that when we are looking at an individual budget year, we're looking at it in the context of that year, but also what's the debt schedule we are projecting over what period of time and what's its impact, and thereby help prioritize when we incur debt versus just incurring debt for debt's sake in a given year, and prioritizing in what year do we do certain things. And that relates directly to the operating budgets. So by having this conversation, it's educational for all of us, clearly. My conclusions from this are that we really, and we did not in the CIP meetings of this past year, we didn't factor water, but there was a notation in the narrative that water is a problem. The precinct is trying to figure out how to address that problem, but we got pricing, if you will, or estimates based on engineering studies that came in 3 months ago at 3.2 million. So we didn't have that number, and therefore it wasn't reflected in this plan. So if you add that, the capital requirements are significantly greater as we look at the total capital plan for the next, in my, 2, 3, 5 years, they're pretty significant numbers. So when we're making decisions of what we put in our budget as a budget committee, I'm suggesting contextually we should look at the whole, not only in 1 year, but also some successive years to determine when we prioritize to do what. That, I don't know, but that's essentially what I was. Are there other thoughts, comments on it that anybody would like to opine on? Having none, Adam, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Before we lose our public, is there any input from members of this public that you would like on any of the subjects that we have discussed or any in general? Having heard none, we're getting close to that hour. It's the Bob and Drool hour, if you will. It's hard to keep focused. I would like to address the next topic, which is financial forecast, with just some reference to information. Lynn is not able to be here, so I'm not going to be the financial expert. I'm just going to share with you 2 things. There's a schedule in front of you that's a draft 2025 tax rate that was done so it shows the progression of our tax rate based upon operating budgets and the assessed valuation of property. And in the last column, it shows what the potential tax rate for the fiscal year 2026 might be, assuming there's no unassigned fund balance applied. And that, you'll see the rate is $3.97. Lynn is going to do a projection for us so we can look at the FY 2027 budget with those same assumptions, so you can see what our current budget is projecting, at least on both aggregate dollars and the tax rate. It's information that can be helpful for us as we deliberate on determining a budget. The second thing Lynn and I talked about, and I didn't have a chance to get the committee's input on, was to try to get a better understanding of our debt picture given the next 5 years where there's significant dollars that we're going to be faced with, factoring in the retirement of current debt obligations. And she sent out a email to us all that reflected our pay down of our current debt so we can see when it terminates. And if you apply new debt, what would that look like in terms of our debt projections for the next 5 years? So she's going to work on that. It was a last-minute request I made of her, and we agreed mutually that that was a big ask for a last minute. I think that will be prepared within the next week or so and be available to us before our meeting on the 21st. And if everybody's okay with that representation of financial forecasting right now, I'll move along to the last subject. And that is our meeting schedule and the process for our motions. There is an outline dated January 7th, single page here that speaks to the motion process, the timing, and the format. And this really is a reiteration of the email that we had distributed among the committee, talking about how we would make motions, what we would include, what's the timing on the motions. And basically, this speaks for itself, but I just want to reiterate this, that between now and really January 17th, so if it's the 7th, we've got 10 days to generate motions, but it doesn't preclude that we bring a motion after that in the meeting of the 21st.
I found the RSA somewhere.
Yes.
No, that's not it. The RSA to appropriate.
Can you speak into the microphone, and is this related to motions?
No, Sorry, let me find the document I was
Okay.
holding on to, and then I'll.
So the process is articulated in this one page that I provided to us all, that we review the budget individually, that we develop our motions, we write a brief narrative to describe the motion, including the dollar amount associated with it, and reference the section of the budget and line item that that motion would pertain to. Those motions would then be compiled, sent to me individually, not copied to anybody in the committee, sent to me. I will compile them into one document. That will be done on and around January 17th, so that it is available to the public, meeting the right to know, RSA 91.A, in a timely fashion to meet that requirement. So the public will have access to what those motions are prior to our meeting on the 21st. The agenda for the 21st is directed at really trying to finalize our budget. We would use the motions as the primary subject matter of that meeting, and then after those are fully vetted, if we are comfortable that we've done so, we will work towards trying to finalize an operating budget from the Budget Committee. At the end of that process, if that budget is different from what the Select Board has adopted, there will be a reconciliation of those budgets. That would take place on the meeting of January 28th, and it would be a meeting combined between the Select Board and the Budget Committee. Ashley and I will work through what the protocol and procedure is for that. So, our goal ultimately is to arrive at a public hearing of the Budget Committee scheduled for February 11th, at which our budget is presented and available to the public for their inquiry. Not their approval, for their inquiry. The budget then, adopted by the committee, goes onto the warrant, which is the other meeting that I wanted to also make us aware of, that we have agreed to meet on the 17th of February, a joint meeting between the Board of Selectmen and the Budget Committee to review all the warrant articles that will be presented to the town for their consideration. We will, I understand, Ashley, correct me, but we will vote on those warrant articles at that meeting so that what is listed in the actual town report on the ballot would be the votes of the Select Board and the vote of the Budget Committee, respectively, on each particular warrant. That would
Correct.
be public.
Correct.
Can't hear you.
Yes.
February 17th at 6.
It might be 5:30. Let me just check.
I think we said we were trying to do it as early as possible.
5 o'clock. Yes, I think it'll
what
likely be several hours, so trying to do it as early as possible. February 17th, 5 PM here in Whipple.
I have many questions. Just clarification questions, not problem questions. So you said you wanted the motions delivered to you in a certain way. Could you provide the committee members an example of what that motion would look like? Because I'm imagining you're going to get 9 different types of emails with motions that, and this goes into a second question. So maybe just if you could give us an example of what the motion in the email should look like, because you referenced the line item, you wanted certain things included.
Okay, I understand what you're asking. I purposely did not provide an example.
Make it something up, but I just want to make sure
I'll
I'm
make something up,
delivering
okay?
it to you
Yeah,
the way you want.
so the format would include a brief narrative that describes the motion, including the dollar amount with supporting data and rationale for it, and then a reference to the budget, section of the budget that's impacted, the sub-department number, and the line item account number. So as an example, my motion is to send the Select Board to San Diego for a 2-day retreat, and associated with that is a motion to increase the budget by $20,000. And that line item would be whatever the select board line item is in the budget. And my rationale is, if we could have a happier select board, we'd have a happier town. So that's off the top of mind, without being specific to an item that would bias anybody, that could be used. An item that I think we are going to need a motion on is we have to look at this request from the Energy Committee, and a motion needs to be made if the committee, by an individual of this committee, that would say the capital reserve request of $150,000 to be granted and applied to the capital reserve in the capital reserve budget for energy solar array, and reference that item, asking for approval. No, I'm not doing that now. I'm trying to provide an example based upon what Chris just asked.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're delivering it to you the way and I know you just explained it there, so that's helpful. I guess the other question is, what are we doing? I would imagine, and I'm going to use I'm going to use the payroll, right, for full-time for fire, because I'm sure that will be an issue we discuss. First off, I'm assuming this is the budget that we're working off of.
Correct.
So the pink budget is what we work off?
Yes, that is the most recent.
Okay.
Assuming that was on your table in front of you?
Yes.
Yep, you're good.
So I'm using this as my base for any motions. Okay, that's helpful.
And the
And
comparison.
yeah, and the
Summary.
capital reserve, which is here as well. This is
Yes.
the most recent. Great. That answers my other question. And then how are we going to handle if John and I and Lindsay have a similar motion, but it's three different, I mean, again, we'll probably likely have some things that are the same. If you're going to put this in a public document, how are we handling multiple motions for the same thing?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. I think if the spirit of the motions is similar, that would be easy. If the dollar amounts are different, then you would consider the individual motion of each
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, I guess we can see how it works that way.
Having not done it before,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
So,
Just to clarify, and I think this is hopefully self-evident, but this is just motions or things that we're recommending to change based off from what is in this final document.
correct.
Correct.
And an additional follow-up. So for example, the Energy Committee, and the Fire Chief. We have to make a motion to make that move, or has that already been brought to us and we will consider it already? I don't understand. That's what I'm confused at.
The current budget, as adopted by the select board, does not include the additional FTE. It
Okay.
includes $25,000 allocated for specific uses in lieu of that. So
yes,
that
we
is
would
not
need a
in this budget.
motion.
You would need because we're creating our budget, we're using this document as the basis.
And this does not include the full-time. I guess that's the other part, is like, we've had lots of meetings. I don't know what's reflected in this budget that we've already discussed as a budget committee, that, like, if I go back 3 meetings and did we discuss this? What's the change been in this versus 3 previous versions?
Yep.
And what does it include and doesn't include? Does that make
Fair
sense?
point.
Yeah.
And I think Lynn's got that information. Might need to update a couple of
Yeah, she
things.
probably has to update. She does have a version of it from early on. But what you see does not include those items because it was not approved by the Board of Selectmen. So I'm happy, I've been taking notes, I'm happy to ask her to update that document.
That would be helpful.
I don't think it's going to be lots of things.
No,
think
I don't
there
think
are
so
a
either.
few subjects that we want to make sure because if I'm going to put a motion forward to increase the budget by X, I want to make sure the amount I'm increasing it by is appropriate. So I don't know it would be helpful to know, and I'm just using fire as the example, what the head count would be, what the budget impact would be for the head count. Like, what am I making a motion of dollar amount of? Right? So if I'd say like, I want to increase,
Yeah,
I want to increase
agree.
that line item
I
by
agree with you.
$100,000.
Yeah, I'm trying to, in my mind, peel back to source documents that were presented in the case of the fire FTE, fire services FTE. The FTE cost projection was $117,000, not including the retirement benefits component.
So that, I do have an updated number for that, and that
Or
is
health.
around 150.
Not including health. Yeah, excuse me,
Yep.
correct.
Yeah, and again, I realize like there'll be nuances. It's that usually we have Lynn to answer like the actual dollar amount, because when we vote, we need to have, or when we
Yep.
make a motion, we need to have the exact dollar amount.
Yes,
And
so
I thi-
for the full-time firefighter, it's 150,000.
150.
Yes,
Okay, and that's an all-in cost.
that's all
All
in,
right.
that's health.
So what I
that's
would suggest
Hampshire
also
retirement.
is that, presuming Lynn is well, able, and present for our meeting on the 21st, we can verify numbers at that time respective to each motion that is made.
Yeah, and I will see if she can update, because it is minimal changes between the two groups. So let me see if she can do some updating. I anticipate she's going to be out tomorrow as well. So I'll get with her when she's back in, and we'll put our heads together and get you
But
guys
that shouldn't
something.
preclude any of us doing our individual
Yeah.
work to
Can I ask a
start to
question on that
arrive at
too?
what we think.
What are the, can you clarify again, what are the laws as to, because Karen has spent a lot of time with the water precinct and she has a better, broader base of knowledge. So I might want to call Karen and ask, like, what is her perception, because she spent more time. And I know there's bylaws as to how we can communicate to each other.
You just can't communicate as a quorum. So
Okay,
when it
more
be-
than, what is that, 4 or 5?
4 or 5.
I'm not,
more than
and
five.
I'm asking this on public record for a reason. I just want to make sure we are clear, very clear, how we should use each other, I would hope, as resources from sitting on those, you know, and.
Yep.
and so, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, so, for example, for the police department. Thank you. For example, for the police department, that wasn't changed, you know, there's not, it's fairly non-contentious. Do you expect, for example, the people who interviewed the police department, in the police department to have, say, a motion, we move that the police department be awarded the same as the selectmen recommended, or?
When we arrive, when we get to motions about an entire budget, for example, your example with the police.
Okay.
You wouldn't be sending me a motion saying, I'm approving, I'm so moving the police budget as represented in the select board budget. The only thing you would be sending a motion to me on at this point is if you are going to alter a number in the budget that's been adopted by the select board with the rationale and support for your motion. Does that make sense? Everybody okay? Okay. Merci beaucoup.
And just assuming our names are not attached to motions publicly, I realize motions here but if we're sending you emails, are you saying, here are all Chris's motions, here are all Meg's
No,
motions?
I'm gonna compile the motion
Okay.
as written in one document. That motion discussion at the meeting on the 21st, in all likelihood, will bring forward the person who made that motion, but it will not be disclosed in the document that's distributed.
The entire purpose of that was so that we had a focused conversation instead of just going through the budget. So, you know, it's not limiting our conversation when we come.
No, in
Yeah.
fact, it's entirely designed to
Yeah,
encourage
exactly.
deliberation and discussion versus being put on the spot saying, yeah, well, I like Chris, so I'll go along with what Chris proposed. But we really are full and complete information and data to inform your individual decision.
Ashley, for you, are those meetings public will be invited. I do have a travel issue now with one of those days. Will members be able to Zoom in?
No, because it has to be in a space big enough to accommodate the public, so it would need to be
But can someone be
here.
on Zoom?
Not on our system, no. So Zoom can happen in Sid Crook, but we can't have Zoom in this room with
And there's
the
no other
technology.
medium to have someone vote from afar and be a part of that meeting?
I think it would be real difficult. Will's got his head down. He doesn't want to entertain this topic.
I think it's important, though, because we did previously do that, and regardless of room, and so to be told it's not possible is somewhat contradictory to, like, somebody with our background who's been on these boards for a long time, and it has been.
Could we, after attending some school board meetings, just my observation, they held them at the development
Professional
center,
Development
right?
Center.
Those, I have been there in the audience where there've been Zoom, and attendees of the board have participated.
Oh, yeah, we've held
and
meetings there on
also
Zoom.
the public. So is that something we could use their space? Just putting it out there as an option.
I can certainly ask. Will, do you have anything that you would like to chime in on about? Okay. All right. I'm happy to ask. I'm happy to make a call down to the SAU and see if we can move locations down there. Happy to.
And sorry for you, do you plan on voting on the 21st and 28th, or do you want to save the voting? Again, I don't know how you're thinking the 21st and 28th work together.
My hope is that we can get through the motions on the 21st and get to approving the budget,
Yes.
that we, as a committee,
And use the 28th as a
And-
reconciliation.
And that's the
Yes.
reconciliation with the Board of Selectmen.
yes, that's the hope. If we can't, then we'd have to
Yeah, just want to make sure.
flex
Yeah, I wanted to
and
make sure
wiggle
that-
around.
Yep.
Rich?
Yeah,
please.
Charlie, if it's okay, I did want to just make one thing clear. You all have a page that says 3% COLA. It's a pink sheet like this. I just want to make sure everyone's aware, a couple of things. At the last select board meeting, unfortunately, I was not available. We had voted a month and a half or so prior to that in a 2-to-1 vote for a total of a 4% raise for our employees. In other words, a total number of 4%. You can say it was a 2.5% step and a 1.5% COLA, or however we want to slice and dice it, which I've never been a fan of, this idea of chopping up a raise into different component parts and giving it different names. What I am concerned about is that this might give people the impression that this is the total for what, under the current budget, of what our town employees would get. The total, the number actually already has a 2.5% step, plus then this 3%, so it is a total of 5.5%. The original vote was for a 4% total raise, and that was a 2-to-1 vote. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there on the 18th of December. There was another vote taken when this was presented, that this was considered to be an accurate reflection of what we were looking at for inflation, a fairly good guesstimate as to what we were looking at for inflation going forward. And so there was another vote taken, and it was a 2-to-0 vote to incorporate that 3% COLA into the in addition to the 2.5% step, for a total of 5.5% step. At the meeting tomorrow night, I will be making clear that that remains not my position. With all due respect to our terrific town employees, I still remain of the opinion that a 4% total raise is a reasonable number. I expect, truthfully, tomorrow night to be voted down on that, but I did want folks to just know that this number here of a 3% COLA is not the entire, this is just the new amount that has now been factored in. There was already a 2.5% factored in prior to this. So it, as of right now, is a 5.5% total raise for our town employees.
And in theory, thank you for the clarification first, and in theory, could you not make a motion as a member of the Budget Committee?
As a member of the Budget Committee, I theoretically could. I mean, I am a little concerned that I'm sort of on a record pace to make myself unpopular with virtually everyone in this town. Why change it? That's true. You know, when you're on the record pace. But I did just want folks to be aware of that, because, you know, it was stated in the Intertown Record that Anderson was in favor of a 3% COLA, and I am in favor of a 3% COLA only for those of our employees who are not currently on the step, which I believe are four? Two. Two employees are no longer on a step system, and so they would get the full 3% COLA, if you will. But as I said, what my concern remains about this system, which is the same problem, candidly, that we have in the school district of, years ago, a teacher said to me, a step isn't a raise, it's a step. And I just, you know, it's not a certificate that we give people as their step, it is money. And so, I think unfortunately this kind of slicing and dicing a raise can confuse people as to what the total number is. And so I just wanted folks to be aware of that. As of right now, it was originally going to be a total raise of 4%. That was just changed to a total raise of 5.5%. Tomorrow night at the select board meeting, I will be again reiterating my position. I do expect to be voted down. But any member of the budget committee can make any motion that they care to.
And just for purposes for the information for the Budget Committee, that dollar difference, I think is like the previous summary that Lynn had for us on the comparative budget. It was 10,920,000, and the summary we have today is 10,984,000. So the delta being about 63,000, just in terms of order of magnitude.
And you all might want to just stay away when I start my car after the meeting tonight, because just in case. I think I'll actually park next to you, but I'm not certain. And one other thing, if you don't mind my just mentioning, just a shameless plug, if you don't mind, on Saturday morning, we do have the school district's deliberative session coming up at the middle school. And not, if you've ever been to it at the high school, which is normally where it is at the middle school this year. And I would be enormously grateful and delighted to see any one of you and as many of your friends as you care to bring along to said deliberative session, because I'm not exactly sure how that's going to go.
What time? What time is it?
The deliberative session is at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning at the middle school.
9 o'clock this Saturday.
That's over half of our revenue. Property taxes, it's a high percentage, so that's where the majority of our money.
Yeah, and just so you folks are aware, the proposed budget number is identical between the school board and the MBC, again, because of a certain amount of a reconciliation type of process. And the budget is increasing over last year by approximately 1%. So I am very satisfied with the work that we did, and especially with the work that our administration did in trying to keep those increases, absolutely reasonable. So, I certainly will be happy and prepared to defend our work come Saturday morning. But again, being that people can bring from the floor, they can bring a different number to the floor and ask that it be placed on the warrant, on the vote, the ballot for March. That is of concern to me, because you all are aware of what happened last year. The advantage last year was we were given notice of that plan. I'm sorry?
No, I'm just saying that.
Yeah, this year, there is no written warrant article that's been brought forward at this time, but someone can do that from the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will accept the motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
All in favor? Aye, aye.